So our immediate threats right now are the empty food and the chemical contaminants and so forth, and we know that something is terribly wrong with the food these days. I mean, 1950s and today, there's a big, big change. And I know, because in 1960, here I am playing bass with my band. We're all skinny tooks. You know, there we are, just skinny. But not today. And don't laugh about this, because this is really serious, and what I'm about to show you. This is not normal. This is not right. This is bad food. These people are suffering from bad food, from bad lobby groups that own politicians that allow this to happen. So let's talk about this crisis going on, this global health crisis, because there's been an endless trail of clues in this. The first one I'd like to bring up is this massive overuse of nitrogen fertilizers all over the globe to produce crops, to keep the yields up. The United Nations Environmental Protection Agency has prepared this soil degradation severity chart, which shows that we're in a soil crisis too. And all these areas where we've over-harvested and used all this stuff and taken all these crops away over these years, and bad practices have created a situation where many nations can't even grow good food anymore. Another one is this decreasing calcium levels in vegetables since modern agricultural practices have been implemented. As you can see, they've gone down quite a bit. And if you look at just broccoli, it's down 53% in 1997 compared to 1975, and now it's much worse, of course. Another clue has been the sudden increase in mineral deficiency disease. Now, I went into the records of the USDA and the AMA and the National Institute of Health, and I drew all these records out and I started charting this stuff. Now, the big one here to really be concerned about, because it has to do with the calcium issue, believe it or not, is the increase in liver disease. Another clue, number 5, is this dangerous depletion of minerals in food, the same iron in lettuce and the same iron in apples from 1950s to today. Now, if you want to get the same iron as you got in an apple in 1950, look how many apples you have to eat in 2014 and how many carbohydrates are you taking in, because that's how you get fat. The other one is this. It's been proven at Harvard, in the news, in Chemistry World, that chemically produced food has the same mineral content as organic food. And this insane level of obesity in the population, and in particular children. They're going to be diabetics their whole life. That's very, very concerning. And how are these clues connected? Well, we know that Russia makes most of the nitrogen fertilizer, but look, if you look at the chart on the left, they don't use it anymore like that. They don't have that kind of application, and they don't have that kind of agriculture anymore. That's since the 90s or 93. However, other countries are. And if you'll notice, where the nitrogen's used, this soil is damaged. And I'll explain this in a little bit. Okay? We have a dangerous depletion of minerals in food. Well, as it turns out, some of these modern foods, like the apple, that have been cross-pollinated and produced from like the Sikkim apple, which had 7,181 phytochemical nutrients in it, compared to like 71 in Golden Delicious, mostly sugars now. I actually do eat Gala apples, because Gala apples have a lot of gluconic acid, which is extremely important for interrupting the glucuronidation activity in the bowel, and I'll get into that in a minute. The other thing is the historical data shows that a reduction in foodborne minerals is happening at the same time as an increase in mineral deficiency disease. So that, I call this a one-to-one cause and effect. Now, there are a lot of details that this doesn't cover. A lot of the diseases there's other things that are acting on those rates. So I found this chart in 1995 or 6 or 7, and I thought, well, that looks pretty scary, so let's look into that, and I did. And it turns out, yeah, out of all these minerals and all the records, they've been decreasing in a specific kind of pattern. And when I look at it this way, we introduced mechanized farming back in the 30s. And that started harvesting more off the land than the life in the soil could regenerate for nutrients in the soil the following year. And so the yields are pretty good, but the yields started going down, and they started going down and going down. And after World War II, they had no more use for making bombs with ammonium nitrate, so they started bombing our croplands. So they put this high nitrogen fertilizer on there, and it brought the yields back. It was a green revolution. But as you can see, the mineral levels kept going down. Then we reached a really critical point, about 1960, when suddenly the bugs arrived. And instead of fixing what had been taken out and fixing the depletion of the minerals, which is, a lot of people have known about this for a long time, they applied the pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and of course, that killed the bugs, but it also dripped into the soil, killed the microorganisms that provide the micronutrients that are available for plants, so they weren't able to produce any micronutrients for the following year, and you got addicted to inorganic chemistry. And then, of course, the introduction of industrial chemicals, all the plastics, all the phthalates, all the polystyrenes and styrene monomers, and all the stuff that's in the environment, in the water, in the air, in the food. And then what I call one of the most dangerous things we've ever done, which is this genetic modification of food crops. The problem with GMO is not just that they've changed the genes with viruses in every bite of food, in every cell, in untold quadrillions of cells in a bite of an apple, is providing you quadrillions of bits of virus. So you're going to have an immune reaction to that. So these are immune reaction foods. You can't wash them off. And it's funny, too, because the spinach debacle at Earthborn Farms, where they had to gather all the spinach up and you couldn't cook it out and you couldn't wash it off, you had to submit the stuff and they'd destroy it. They said, well, it was from wild pigs that somehow contaminated these fields in like 3 locations. It turns out that they were experimenting with from Semeta Seeds, a new genetically modified spinach strain, and of course, maybe, I'm not saying it did, but maybe the virus became virulent again. It's hard to say. But there was a very interesting thing that happened. The FBI came into Earthborn Farms with guns drawn and took all their hard drives. Just something to consider. Yeah. The other thing, of course, with the GMO is the glyphosate, which is going to be chelator, and the surfactant, which is polyetheroxylated taloamine. Funny word, I know, it's POEA, it's like I want to call it, but it makes hydrophobic glyphosate hydrophilic, so it sticks to the leaf. Unfortunately, this is a very strong endocrine disruptor. It breaks tryptophan, phenylalanine, alanine. You don't get your endocrine hormones. You don't get your serotonin. You don't get your melatonin. It breaks all that in the body, so you don't sleep well. You get depressed. Then you start eating sugars, and you start gorging on things to make you feel good. So this whole project with the chemicals that are used in this project are extremely toxic. And we know that mineral deficiency in plants causes diseases in plants. And, of course, mineral deficiencies in food causes diseases in people. Look at the increase in disease rate from 1980 to 2011 in heart conditions, bronchitis, asthma, tinnitus, and bone deformations. 4,000% in asthma. Do you need an inhaler or do you need a dose of magnesium? Because those are the minerals that are associated with these deficiency diseases. A lot of people talk about low sperm count, low sperm motility, infertility issues. Well, right after the head of the sperm is a ring of mitochondria, and it runs off of magnesium. So if you're magnesium deficient, which just about everybody is, your sperm's not going to be very powerful either. So the third one is this one, it's calcium deficiency, because it ties in with this directly. When you start using tons of nitrogen on plants, and you start harvesting all these plants without taking the time to put the minerals back, you change the subsoil chemistry. Albrecht and Durer and these old agronomists that knew that you had to have a 7-to-1 calcium-magnesium ratio to have a healthy, fluffy soil, because you need to get oxygen in the soil because the roots need oxygen. But when you get down to 1-to-1 calcium-magnesium, magnesium becomes the predominant decomposition chemistry, and then you get rot because the soil becomes very clumped, becomes anaerobic, you get alcohol and formaldehyde being emitted, and that's the stuff that attracts the bugs. It's not the plants. So as we got these decreases in calcium and in sulfur, that's where the liver disease comes in, because calcium and sulfur are necessary for phase 1 and phase 2 detox in the liver so you can get rid of these toxins. So the livers don't work, livers malfunction. And of course, obesity. Well, sugar stimulates the same part of the brain as cocaine. All right? So it's an addictive food. It's an addictive additive. And the bigger problem with that is when you eat sugar, it forces your pancreas to squirt tons of insulin into your body, or otherwise you die from a sugar coma. And that's the problem. One of the biggest problems is sugar's almost in everything. So I ask the question, which has the most sugar? Which one do you think? The one on the right or the one on the left? Yeah, you're true. Good answer. Actually, it's the granola. Yeah. Now, what's really interesting is look how many sugar cubes in a thing of Heinz ketchup, or in Minute Maid bottled orange juice, orange sugar juice, or barbecue sauce, or Red Bull. I mean, you don't see the sugar because it's been super saturated, and that's why it's kind of thick, all right? When you look at the glycemic index, the sugar content in common foods, white baguettes have more sugar than a candy bar, because these are weapons of mass destruction. Yeah. Thank you. One of the worst is wheat. Dr. William Davis, who's spoken at the Longevity Now conference, has gotten the book Wheat Belly, and he talks about wheat. And the problem with wheat is it's been changed, all right? Old wheat from 10,000 years, completely safe to eat. It was great. Grew about this tall, though, and it would blow over in the wind. It was harvested, it was an issue, and so forth. So he said, well, you know what? I think it'd be better if we had it short so we could harvest it with these combines and be able to harvest more. So he started breeding it with other strains of grass. And he got a nice, shortened thing with a huge seed head on top, great for the combine. So instead of having the machine match the nature, he decided we'll make the nature match the machine. But the problem is grasses don't combine like we do. When we produce children, our genes divide and then come together to form the same number of genes. In grasses, they're additive. So the second grass added 14 more chromosomes, which has made 28 chromosomes in modern wheat, and it also created super starch, amylopectin A, which is a starch, which damages your pancreas by too much sugar, right? Rapidly digested, leads to insulin resistance because you're putting so much insulin in the system, your insulin receptors on the cell surfaces get burnt out, and they can't even sequester the sugar. So you have to have more and more fat cells made. See how this is working now? And it raises blood sugar faster than table sugar. And of course, although this didn't go anywhere, thank God, Clearfield Wheat did experiments with sodium actinide in I believe it was the 90s. And but this particular mutated one had 9 times the level of gliadin, which interrupts biological function, digestion, and so forth. The thing about this is so crazy. Sodium actinide is so poisonous. It's been told by the CDC to the farm guys that if someone is dying from it, if you get any in your mouth and you're dying from it, do not give that person CPR because you'll die too. And do not throw their vomit in a sink because it'll explode. And it's happened. That's how damaging this stuff is. So this tech industry and this bio industry, it's so crazy. And of course it causes leaky gut. These proteins are very, very irritating to the gut. It causes all these changes in the T cells. You get these killer cells that are killing your villi in your intestinal wall, and that's the celiac issue and so forth and so on. Now there's another real issue here, real toxic reason is because they spray wheat, even if it's organic seed, they spray with glyphosate to dry it out. The claim is that if you use glyphosate, the wind and the rain and the time will make it less dangerous and so forth, but if you're spraying it right before you harvest it, it's in the wheat. So if you look at some of the glycemic indexes of gluten-free foods, so it's like, let's not do wheat, let's do gluten-free, let's use rice flour and beet flour and tapioca flour. But it turns out that these even have a higher glycemic index than table sugar, and some of them are ridiculous. But here's where I'm going with this. By focusing on the gluten instead of the gliadin, which is the real issue, and you have these companies that make insulin like Eli Lilly, okay, they've partnered with Disney to do these books called the Dishing It Up and the Gluten-Free Diet for Type A Diabetics, Type 1 Diabetics. And it's not just in English, okay? So what does that say? That says that they know that these flours are far more, have a higher glycemic index than sugar. It'll damage more pancreases than wheat could ever damage, and they're going to get a lot more sales in insulin. I mean, this is one of those big issues as far as these lobby groups, pharmaceutical groups, and this stuff, and we have to really be careful about this. We also have the problem of genetically modified organisms, government-sanctioned biotech experiment. And, of course, they contain glyphosate, which we talked about. Gene splicing, they take a bacteria, and they take a chunk out, and they insert it in a food, and they do it in very interesting ways, and they put little gene particles on gold pellets, and with a 22 caliber pistol, they blast it into a petri dish, and they raise all these cells to these plants finally, and they figure out which plants have the characteristics they want, and they grow those plants and propagate them to seed and so forth, but they don't tell you that every single cell in that plant has a virus in it. A piece of virus is in that plant because that's the problem. Toxins dissipate, genetics replicate. And it doesn't matter if you use GMO with Roundup, or just Roundup alone, it causes tumors in animals. It kills crops, it kills people, it kills the animals eating the crops, and it's causing enormous increases in deaths. As you can see, thyroid cancer deaths have increased since the use of this stuff, Alzheimer's deaths, kidney failure, rates of autism, chronic constipation since the use of GM crops, esophageal reflux, Crohn's disease, diabetes. These things irritate everything in the body because they're loaded with virus. And they're also killing the monarchs. We think it's directly linked to glyphosate use.
It strains credulity to imagine any of you has found their way here without knowing of some of the problems of glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup and numerous other agricultural chemicals. Today I want to describe another problem. It's found at the rear gates of the battle surrounding glyphosate, GMOs, Monsanto, Bayer, and the like. The story I'm going to tell you is not one that is easy to put together, and it will be so different from what you have heard, even in the realm of anti-unnatural advocacy, it may seem difficult to believe, so it requires a backstory. Before I was S0, I got a law degree, worked in the Supreme Court of Ohio. There's actually dispositional precedent existing that is about 3 words different from what I submitted as a 1L summer intern. I never ended up practicing law, didn't even take the Ohio bar. Instead, I took a job as due diligence lead for an equity firm that was interested in, among other things, biomimetic pharmaceuticals. And this was really interesting to me because unlike so much of the exotic, unnatural chemistry that is basically making up the pharmaceutical world and comes with pages and pages of side effects, biomimetics mimic biology. They are taking their cues from and designed with our natural immune system in mind. I do not wish to plug or in any way even single out a company or product, so I will do this as generally as possible. They got heavily involved with a compound that was designed to mimic the human antimicrobial peptide LL37, and it indeed mimicked the activity well. Turns out that taking cues from our own bodies is a very good idea. However, we knew how to engineer the appropriate chemical structure and saw that it worked in vitro and animal studies as expected. But we had no real idea of the exact mechanism of action. We're not even really sure what LL37 was doing to be such a powerful piece of our immune system. Being the diligence lead, our chief medical folks directed my focus on that exact question. What is the mechanism of action of our compound, and by inference, what is the mechanism of action of antimicrobial peptides? The simplest way to explain these peptides is to think of the immune system as having two sides, the innate and adaptive sides. The adaptive side kicks in once an invader gets in, that's things like your white blood cells, but the innate system is far more important. It's your first line of defense. Antimicrobial peptides are found in our mucus, saliva, ocular fluids, skin oils, stomach, etc., and they are like a landmine for incoming invaders. So how does it work? First, you have to know that these are considered cationic antimicrobial peptides. They have a positive or cationic head group, which seeks out the generally negative signals given off by pathogen invaders. These come from their lipid bilayer makeup, membrane proteins like teichoic acids or lipopolysaccharides, or the material moved out of the cell by efflux pumps or other toxin removal mechanisms. The important thing to get here is that invaders give themselves away with a negative signal in a number of different ways. They just can't help themselves, and that is what our cationic or positively charged peptides seek out. Now, when examined, whether using human peptides or our biomimetic compound, both gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria showed blebbing, apoptosis, and cell death as the cationic head group depolarized the cell membrane. The hydrophobic segment of the molecule slices into the membrane to escape the water surroundings, and the cell is literally broken apart and destroyed. Darn good thing to have as a defense system against invaders, provided it is attacking invaders and not your own body. So now we come back to the food, and as bad as glyphosate probably is, there is an equally concerning change to our food that allows them to spray so much poison. Without getting too complex, they had to insert a pathogen gene into our food in order to make it survive the Roundup spraying. The problem with that is now there is a tiny piece of pathogen in every cell of the plant, and as Dr. Wong eloquently explained in the Jurassic World movie, you cannot insert new genes into a species without expecting the corresponding physical and behavioral characteristics. So regardless of what change is actually taking place in the cells, whether it's the lipid bilayer, membrane proteins, efflux pumps, or other removals of something else, what happens if even just one of those negative signaling characteristics begins presenting in our food? Well, if those signals come out inside our body, then our peptides will be activated and our body will release more of them. So these positively charged head groups go out seeking the negative signal to destroy, but they can't find it. You see, plant food cells are zwitterionic, meaning that their lipid bilayer is a positive and negative piece mishmash that looks electrically neutral from afar or an outside cell's point of view. The cationic head groups will look at the food cell giving off the signal and not have the foggiest clue that that is where it's coming from. So what to do next if you are an antimicrobial peptide? You see, it can't just shed its positivity and it can't take a flight out of your body for vacation, so it seeks the next most electrically negative cell in your post-digestion system, your red blood cells. It begins attacking those, causing everything you'd expect with your red blood cells under attack, but also, because of its destructive mechanism of action, it spills the inner cell contents out, and that is one excellent way to develop cytotoxicity. Folks, your immune system is your friend, but when it's activated, your entire body is under stress. Every last organ, every cell. It is not a healthy thing to have one's immune system activated, which is why it subsides when it isn't needed to fight a pathogen anymore. In the case of our food giving off the signals, our peptides can't find them and instead contribute to a host of secondary issues that are wholly a function of electromagnetic biology. So how do we know if this is accurate analysis? That's tough. The smoking gun would be hormone and other regulator analysis, the same type of thing that showed bovine growth hormone upregulated insulin growth factors in humans, which led to things like being obese or could even carry carcinogenicity. What I would find difficult to accept is the notion that glyphosate is somehow harmless, yet they had to genetically modify the plants or they would die from the spray. And if you get past that, somehow the inclusion of pathogen genes would have to avoid creating any secondary effects in the cell outside of its primary one. A parting thought that came from our former CEO, he's worked at Battelle and Procter & Gamble, is that the human body is very adaptive. But it can only adapt so quickly, and there is no question we've changed and continue to change the food much more rapidly than we can change ourselves. Be safe, everyone.
The other thing we talked about is this enormous chemical load we have in society right now. Phthalates from plastics is the thing that makes plastics, elastic, and it comes out of the plastic. It comes out of your plastic drinks. It comes out of your plastic, liquid water bottles and stuff. And it's causing hormonal imbalances, and kids don't know if they're guys or girls anymore. I mean, it's kind of a funny picture on the right there, but really, what's wrong with that guy? Is it really that he's adopted this social attitude about the social, consciousness of the Democratic Party and all this crap? Or is it really the fact that he's been so damaged by the chemical attack upon him from a certified government-approved food supply that he doesn't know what to do? Because these things are dangerous. They increase production of certain hormones, decrease production of others, imitate hormones, turn some hormones into others, interfere with hormone signaling, tell cells to die, and it's costing us a fortune, almost as much as the Pentagon. I mean, that's an enormous price. So we have this issue with what we do with our crops and our croplands. And by putting all these things down and loading all these things up and bringing all these bugs in and bringing all this stuff to bear, we'll all be sick, and a lot of us already are. We can bring it back, okay? Because we can get back to this. There's still time to do it, but it's going to take specific steps. Now, I've talked on Dr. Mercola's show 3 or 4 times now on this. And, I've talked to Joe, and I say, look, why don't we do just one thing? Do the one thing we never did. Put the minerals back. We haven't tried that yet. And by doing this, it renormalizes the fertilizer use, and it renormalizes the microorganisms, because everything with DNA uses minerals. As it turns out, a friend of mine, Dr. Richard Ulrey, wrote a book called Minerals in the DNA, and he found out that although there's 4, amino acids, there's guanine, cytosine, adenine, and thymine, there's only 3 in a row in the genetic code, which means there's 4 possibilities, 3 can only be used, that's a 64 matrix codon, and it turns out that each one of those 3 combinations, TAG, TTT, TA, whatever, has a specific valence potential and a specific mineral with a valence potential that'll talk to the code as a phosphor-sugar bond, open it up, break the bond, open it up to read the code, laces back, and you make these protein sequences. Without the minerals, you can't access your code. So a lot of the problems we're having is from demineralization and not being able to read the DNA to be able to actually make the things that fix us. And the minerals are very important for bee health and pollinators as well, because they do pollinate almost all of our crops. Is that these rare earth minerals are especially important for specific color guides and the nectar guides of flowers, because the bees see in the near ultraviolet. They don't see in the visual range. So what we see on the left is this nice yellow flower, but the bee sees a target guide in the center. So if these minerals aren't there to build those infrared pigments, they can't really see their food. So without these guys, these are our workers. These actually make our food for us. Anyway, so we really don't need health care. We need more health.